In 2016, the institution of Opus Dei, as well as several individuals representing the institution, were found guilty and convicted in France of multiple criminal breaches of labor law in the court case Tissier v. Opus Dei. Opus Dei, the corporate work where the victims have been employed, and I say that with quotation marks because they were not paid, as well as two of the corporate work's employees, were made to pay several hundreds of euros in fines to a total of 73,000 euros. And I have already discussed this case in previous episodes, but the reason I am bringing it up again is because the individual who initiated the lawsuit, Catherine Tissier, was also exposed to suppressive and controlling techniques with the use of drugs. And experts called to testify during her trial stated that the story she tells is quite characteristic of the influence of certain sects on their members, with early recruitment and commitment, total adhesion, a shared ideal, the implementation in place of a relational technique with one or more guardians, a technique of guilt and imposed secrecy which leads to sub-depression, even depression, and induces greater dependence on the sect in which therapeutic hope is formed. After several months of normal life and privileged relational support, the disappearance of the personality anomalies demonstrates that the depressive acts were generated by the abuse of authority which controlled conscience and kept her in a social precariousness which deprived her of all freedom. The vulnerability of Catherine Tissier is sufficiently demonstrated by the two expert reports which describe, at the time of the facts, a manifest psychological vulnerability with a subdepressive or even depressive state inducing dependence on others. It does not matter that the first expert dates this vulnerability back to a period prior to his entry in the Dawson School. The expert in question was the Opus Dei psychiatrist who was supposed to be looking over Catherine and making sure that she was getting the care that she needed. In addition, the testimonies relied on by the defendants to demonstrate that Catherine Tissier was not able, due to the fragility of her state of health, to work with others and had to be taken care of, also contribute to the demonstration of apparent vulnerability. Finally, the medical certificate issued by Dr. Comant, who examined her during her return to the parental home in 2001 and concluded the need for gradual drug withdrawal following a heavy treatment with neuroleptics, sedatives, leaves no doubt about her vulnerability, which is quite apparent to all those who were in contact with her on a daily basis. So there are three key things that I would like to point out about these paragraphs from the court case. The first is that the medical experts established the fact that Catherine's story lines up with the stories that other survivors of high control groups, cults, and sects report having. The majority of the mental health issues that she suffered while she was in Opus Dei were a result of the abusive authority that she was subjected to, and that rather than helping her, the drugs that they gave her made everything worse, induced a vulnerability in her, and kept her from being able to live her life. And the fact that once she was removed from that environment and allowed to reestablish meaningful relationships with the people in her life, her symptoms disappeared. And that points to this institution and this organization being the culprit and the problem, not the individual themselves. I think it is really important to keep that in mind, and that is a fact which will continue to be emphasized throughout the rest of this episode. And I have quite a bit of documentation about Tissier v. Opus Dei, including an unofficial English translation of the French court case and a Q&A document that breaks down the facts and findings of the case, and those are linked down in my source document in the description of this video. So if you're not familiar with this case and you would like to learn more, those two documents and the couple of videos that I've done will probably get you caught up to speed. But I bring it all up again today because it is such an important case. It establishes precedent for holding not just Opus Dei's corporate works responsible, which Opus Dei claims to have no interest or attachment to, but also the organization as a whole, which is a huge problem. Opus Dei has been very skillful at avoiding any type of meaningful litigation, and they've always maintained that there is no institutionalized problem and that the experiences that so many former members report having are these random outliers in an otherwise pristine and holy organization. But I think that by looking through these accounts and these cases, the truth becomes self-evident. But because of that attitude, the organization has been able to more or less totally avoid any type of meaningful accountability, except in Tissier v. Opus Dei. And that case establishes that, at least in that particular situation, Opus Dei not only exerted undue influence over Catherine's life and her will to live, but that individuals representing the organization seemingly didn't bat an eye at referring Catherine to an Opus Dei doctor who prescribed her increasingly heavy doses of tranquilizers. And I think that it would be reasonable to deduce that the situation that Catherine endured is not an anomaly, but rather an indication of a standard operating procedure that, according to a number of former members from different regions around the world, has been utilized to suppress and control not just the truth, but also the free will and bodily autonomy of innocent people.